Hi, I'm Kathryn.
And I'm Theresa.
And we are the co-authors of the book, Pass the Baton, Empowering All Music Students.
Our goal is to share stories of educators who are passing the baton and empowering their music students. We want to help teachers create music lessons that transform students from passive consumers to vibrant creatives. Welcome back to the Pass the Baton podcast. We're here to talk about all things student empowerment in music education. Before we get into today's episode, we want to remind you to follow or subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any future episodes.
In addition, if you like what you hear today, please consider leaving a rating or review. That's what helps podcasts like Pass the Baton grow. So this episode, Theresa, right? We wanted to kind of just do a recap of all the great episodes we've had so far in season 2. I can't believe we're already in season 2.
I know it's been pretty awesome to think about who we've had the opportunity to talk to. I mean, for me, a professional highlight was definitely getting to meet Jody Blackshaw for episode 32. That was just really, really exciting.
Yeah. Very much so. And for me, it's just, we talk about this all the time, but it's just great professional development for us. So there's a lot of our guests that recommend books or recommend videos to see or things. And so I'm currently reading Music Outside the Lines by Maud Hickey. And again, it's just something that I discovered through talking with Roger Koss. So it's just great to have all these episodes and learn all these new things from everybody else.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love how, we've talked to such a wide variety of people who are in the classroom doing the thing. And it's just been a really great thing. So this episode is pretty much just highlights from what you've seen so far. We'll kind of do a little recap of the various guests. And then what this will do is it'll kind of bring us up to a little break for winter. We'll take a little bit of time off for the winter holidays and be back at it again in January.
Sounds good.
It's been massive, actually.
Yeah, I bet.
It's been massive. And sometimes it's shocking to students if you haven't had a collaborative culture beforehand, right? All of a sudden the students, there might even be this barrier of trust saying like, do you really want to know what we have to say? By the way, be prepared, right? You have to be ready. And one of the ways to get at it actually is to share with students, like, it's okay to talk about things that we're not doing super well. Let's talk about that. And actually play this game I'll share with you. I call, the theme is how we throw the ball affects how the ball is received. And you can play this game with your students. And I'll kind of show you here on the video is I always start off with this imaginary prop. And before I begin, I'll say to students, can we agree that as musicians and leaders that we tend to be creative? Most people raise their hand. Yeah, we tend to be. And then I say, can you agree that we tend to be solution finders? Like we're focusing on what we want to create rather than what's wrong. And I think that's a really important aspect. Particularly creating a vision. It's so easy to go down that negative rabbit hole and be like, you come up with a series of negatives. We don't want this. We don't want that. We don't want that. I would share it. Let's move away from that and let's move towards what we do want.
Yeah.
And so that's really important. And so before I begin this creative game with students, I get them in that mindset. I'll say, I want you to think outside of the box. Let's get outside of our comfort zone. However this begins is not how it needs to end. So it's really important in the brainstorming process to get in that positive frame of mind of anything is possible. So many folks will put the barrier on themselves, say, oh, we've never done that before, so we can't do it. I say the past is the past. Let's create the present and the future now. And so what I'll do is I'll begin and I'll just throw this imaginary ball and maybe start up like I'm playing basketball, like dribbling the ball, as you can see on the video. And then I'll pass the ball to a student and they'll catch it and they'll often start passing this imaginary ball around. And then a creative student will transform the ball into maybe like a Frisbee or a football, right? Or bowling, which is always fun, right? Or volleyball. And then somebody really breaks out of the box and then they move even away from this ball idea and it can be anything, right? So somebody will turn it into a sandwich and they pass the sandwich on because they're super generous, right? Somebody will turn it into water and, pass some water to somebody. And they might even turn it into like a kitten or something, although you shouldn't throw the kitten anyways. and then I'll share with students like, oh, you could even turn it into a big beach ball, and I'll start making like a big air pump, right, and blow the ball up to this giant ball, and then I'll throw it super slowly, right, and then everybody catches it slowly. And what I share is that if somebody throws the ball at you really quickly, you have to catch it quickly. If somebody throws a ball at you slowly, how do you catch it? Naturally, you catch it slowly. And this teaches a really important theme for leadership and really for our culture, which is how we throw the ball affects how the ball is received. How we communicate affects how others respond to us. How we lead is going to affect how others are going to want to work alongside us. And so this then leads to a question for the students, which is, how are we throwing the ball? How are we throwing the ball as students? How are we throwing the ball as a class? If you have multiple grade levels in your ensemble, how are the older students throwing the ball to the new students or the younger students? And that's led to some really beautiful, I guess, revelations and conversations. And it's also revealed things. I think part of this creating culture we have to look under the layers, right? Behind closed doors, what's really going on. And sometimes you'll find out, things that, disappoint or make you sad, such as a freshman saying, I don't think my section leader knew my name the entire marching band season. And so kind of revealing that, or I didn't feel like I was welcomed. In fact, I thought about quitting every day because I didn't feel like I belonged. So that could be on the list of maybe we're not throwing the ball super well. And then you have another list on how are we throwing the ball well? And there might be things like, well, we play great music, or, we have a lot of pride in pep band and in the stands. And that's great. So then we think about how can we take the things that we're not doing well and turn those into the positive column. And that also makes the vision and creating the vision and mission for your group more relevant to the students, and saying, hey, we're acknowledging these challenges and struggles that we're having, but we're going to work this year to convert those into positives.
But I'll just say 13 Moons, like that's where it comes from. But the very first time I did it, I went to Vancouver in the July of 2017. And I didn't know how I was going to teach it, but I said to myself for the first time ever, you're a good educator. You know what you're doing. Take a bunch of resources with you that you know work well and let it happen. Just see where it takes you. And for the first time ever, again, this is coming back, Kathryn, to this idea of not being restricted, to not giving yourself limits. I didn't give myself any limits at all. And for the first time ever in my life, I entered the flow state whilst teaching. So we were between 3 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon, tough call, tough time to be doing stuff. And we would start at 3, and the next time I would look at the clock, it would be 5:05. And someone would be tapping, and I still had students going, I think we need to do this. Let's try this. I want to do this next. It was that kind of thing. And after the very first rehearsal, a really good mate of mine, Chris Ward, who teaches in Hong Kong, came and sat next to me and put his arm around me and said, what was that? And I went, I don't know. I don't know. And throughout that week, we composed this piece, and it also aligned with the fact that we were bringing Peace Dancer to life for the first time. So Peace Dancer wasn't written as it is now. There were things to change and things that needed to be rewritten, and I did several rewrites through the week. So not only were they experiencing writing their own piece, they were witnessing firsthand a composer alter and change her own music with their feedback as well. So we had this explosive week, and when I got to the end of it, I sat there and I thought, this resource, 13 Moons, is so powerful. I'm a bit frightened of it. I actually am a little bit scared of it. But it, again, we go looking for the evidence to support what we know. And then in this case, I used the evidence to continue to create something, and then it proved itself. Yes, these applications to neuroscience. Yes, this is how the brain works. Guess what? It does, because it's just proven itself in abundance. And then it was every student in the whole world who plays in a band should experience this at least once, because this is just like nothing else they get to do ever.
I used Caldecott award-winning book, Martin's Big Words, as the foundation for this project. And what we wanted to do is we read through how Dr. Martin Luther King's words have really driven change through the civil rights era and still to this day. Excuse me. And then looking at his big words, what other words help drive a civil rights movement to make changes in our law, to make changes in our society for the betterment of people of color. And we looked at civil rights music specifically. We looked at it in depth and talked about the value and the importance of lyrics and how they can drive a message. We looked at the value of what it means to be someone who writes a piece of music as a composer. You know, so we're in third grade. The children have just learned, I'm old school, you know, recorder. And we've gotten them to understand and know a little bit how music works. They're starting to put to practice that, okay, I see a piece of paper with some symbols on it, and I can take that now and I can put it on this flute and I can make music happen. So I wanted to take it to the next step. Let's write our own music. Let's sit down. Let's get the concepts going. Okay, let's look at what's important here. So at this school particularly, it's a responsive classroom school. Basically our motivation for driving student behavior, our motivation for basically character, just character building, I guess you would call it, is called CARES. And it's cooperation, assertion, responsibility, empathy, and self-control. And so those were things that were identifiable among my third grade students. They understood what those words meant. They've been put into practice. It's universal across the school. It's universal as they get older and they move onward up into new grade levels. And so that was something I knew we needed to bring to the music composition. And so using this example of big words in the civil rights movement in the era of music, cultural responsive practice says we've got to make it about our population and who we teach. So my population was predominantly white. We had several students of color, high socioeconomic status, and I knew that we needed to first bring down a big concept into a very particularly specific concept of simple notation, simple lyric writing, and a message that's meaningful within our lyrics. And that was the whole goal of this project. So this was a music composition project. It lasted about 3 weeks. We started by coming up with simple melodic tunes. You know, we put those to the xylophones. I let them, you know, they're very attached to their iPads right now. So we also got to play around a little bit on Chrome Music Lab. We got to take our iPads and learn a little bit more about guitar. What's the one? Apple's
GarageBand?
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we used several different vehicles to kind of create this melodic line, you know, and the kids were given very specific instructions of, you know, how many quarter notes they could use. The note needed to end on a pentatonic C, you know, those kinds of things were very simple, but where they got to start taking agency over their learning was you get to pick your theme. But your theme has to represent one of these CARES traits. So they got to pick cooperation as their theme, or they got to pick assertion, responsibility, empathy, self-control. Down the line, after looking at the data in front of me and all these projects laying before me, most of the kids evenly split kind of got to choose, and it was amazing to see kind of what kids came up with. They knew that they had the tools to write a simple melodic line. They had the tools to write a poetic lyric to go with it. And now they had a foundation of what it looks like in a big movement like the civil rights era, and how we can make a movement happen within our own classroom and in our own grade level at our own school.
I think one of the things that is always my goal is I want the kids to see themselves as musical, not only inside the four walls of the classroom, but also outside of, and taking the things that we do in the classroom just beyond.
Got
right?
it.
So
Okay.
have
Well,
you ever experienced anything like that?
oh, I think probably the project or the thing that we do in our classroom that resonates the most with that thought is we do a collaborative chamber music night between Amy and I. And my students, it's multifaceted at the high school, to where at the beginning of the school year, they have to pick a piece that they're going to work on, and they can either choose to go the solo and ensemble track, where they go then and perform it at solo and ensemble, and then hopefully state solo and ensemble, and so on. Or they can choose to do a portfolio track, where each day that we do a chamber music day, where I give them the chance to get in their groups and work together, and they pick who they're going to play with. They pick the music they're going to play with. We talk about, maybe you need to think about your instrumentation before you pick a piece of music, or maybe you need to, once you pick a piece of music, then you go out and find the people who play those instruments to fit, so we navigate through those challenges. But I really give them the opportunity to make all the choices. They just are required to have something that they play, and then they work on it throughout the year. And then that chamber music, then they perform, regardless of whether they did solo and ensemble or a portfolio, to keep track of their progress. They perform it at the very end of the year. And it's a collaborative concert that both Amy and I have our students playing in together. So the middle school students then get to hear the high school students and what they're capable of doing. And Amy and I try to do that a few different ways throughout the school year, but this is one of the more impactful, because it involves all sixth grade all the way up through seniors with this performance. So you have sixth graders who are doing their very first chamber music experience, along with seniors who have now been doing this for 6-7 years, and they're playing, Mozart woodwind quintets, or, other various much more challenging pieces of music that these middle school students didn't even have any idea existed before. And now they get to hear these things.
All my kids could talk about this year was she had 2 percussion ensembles that played. And honestly, like, we had to, they were both like kitchen sink percussion ensembles. Every toy, gadget, odd end was out there. And that's all my kids, these little kids who had like just moved up to like drum pad and were learning snare bass cymbals. That's all my kids could talk about, was they got to see all these juniors, seniors leading this super awesome percussion ensembles. It was so, so, so cool to see.
So then, along with the performance part of this for the high school students, I also require my students to compose short pieces of chamber music that they're due at the middle of the school year. So right around our semester mark in January. So that way I have enough time to go through, edit them, sort them to the best of my ability. But then I send them down to Amy, who then assigns the middle school students different pieces that my high schoolers have written. So then my high schoolers
They actually pick them. I don't assign them.
Well, but the high schoolers then get to hear their compositions as well as contribute through their own performance. So they really get to hear themselves as a musician, and they get to hear that something that they did connected with other people, that their work is being played. So just seeing that you don't have to be, a famous composer to have your music played.
Mhm.
You can write music for the sake of writing music, and people will play it. And the best extension of this that I can take this for the next level of growth is that every year for the last 3 years, I have now had students who have come to me and said, Stan, I really like this piece of music. Either it's a piece of pop music, or it's from a video game, or it's for something. Can I arrange this and can we play it? And I said, you know what? You put in the time to arrange it and write the parts. you're absolutely correct that we are going to play it and we'll find a way to make it work. And I had 2 years ago, I had a senior who is a saxophone player, and it escapes me the piece that they arranged, but they kind of started the trend. And then last year I had a senior who took up the tradition and did something from The Legend of Zelda that my top ensemble played at our spring concert and arranged. And then this year I've already had a student, he's going to be a junior, who came to me and said, I'd really like to arrange something from Super Smash Brothers. And we've had people do it every year. Can I do it? And it's been amazing. He's been sending me weekly updates with his score, with his MIDI, and he's asking my advice. Like, what do you think I should do with these percussion parts? Or how many clarinet parts do you think we should have here? Should I double it or should I triple it? Like, what? And it's, again, just it's amazing. It's amazing to just, once these students learn and show themselves just what they can do, give themselves permission to try these things and do these things. It's amazing.
Absolutely. And especially, I know we've been talking about post-COVID, the way that our students learn has really changed. Universal design, if you take anything away from this, is all about multiple means, multiple ways of doing things. So there are 3 main areas of universal design where we talk about engagement, action and expression and representation. And to give a little bit more about what those mean, when we're talking about engagement, we're talking about keeping interest and self-regulation and making sure that students can sustain something. When we're talking about representation, we're talking about comprehension and making sure that they understand all of our symbols, especially in music. We have a lot of those. And then action and expression could be physical actions, but also really, for me, it comes down to communication and executive functioning. And basically, when we think about universal design, it's a way of making sure that our spaces are accessible from the get-go. So though there are going to be accommodations and modifications for specific students, it's making sure that even students that don't have IEPs, students that are coming to us from any background, has access. The biggest question I get is, okay, I don't have any students with IEPs or 504s in my class, but everybody still needs access. Accessibility isn't just for people with disabilities, it is for everybody. We all had accommodations when we were out. Some of us worked from home, some of us were able to come to school, and we had to do what we could do to engage. And that's what UDL is about. It's about finding ways for everybody to be able to be part of the conversation or the class or the activity. It's kind of general overview.
Yeah, I like that, especially how you reinforce that it's for everybody. I think when I was first introduced to the idea of UDL, people talked about like a ramp going into a building. Yes, that can help somebody who has mobility problems, but it can also help someone pushing a stroller or someone carrying heavy packages, or if you're just tired that day.
Exactly.
And yeah, I love that idea.
Yeah. And I think we also get so tied up in, we have, this one way that we've taught this lesson forever. And when we're able to break it down and get a new idea to utilize in our lessons, we're able to meet so many more students. If you think about your experiences teaching, there's always a student that doesn't want to do something exactly the way that we have it in our plans, and that's okay. But they can still engage with what we're doing if we present it in a different way. And so, especially for my students, I talk a lot about communication and representation because those are areas in which my students have the most challenges. So if we're doing an activity and they don't understand the activity, how am I communicating that to them? It's often thinking about students as not choosing to not participate, but not having the access to participate. So that really is what universal design is all about. And I know we've had a big push, especially with diversity, equity, inclusion, and access, which is rightful. It's taken a little too long for us to get here, to be honest. But thinking about that access piece, we don't want our students to come in and have to feel othered or have to feel different. And when we're able to set our students up with access from the beginning, I know I keep saying that, but it's so important to be ingrained. They don't feel othered. They feel like the music room is a safe space for them, or whatever class they're in is a safe space. And our ultimate goal is to provide a space where students can become musicians, or maybe they won't become musicians, but they will become consumers of music when they are older. And we want to make sure that we are continuing to provide them with opportunity so that they will always have music in their life. And to me, that's what UDL is really all about.
It's such an important concept because so often I feel like we're training the future music majors, right? We're our path, our goal is the ones who are going to go to college for music, who are going to continue to become professional musicians. And in doing that, we're hitting such a small percentage of the students. I think, in you probably know the numbers better than I do. I was looking at something that said like 3% of college majors are in the arts. That's like a really small number of kids when you think about it. And what you're saying with by reaching the amateurs, how many more kids does that open doors for?
Yeah, and in high school we have, if you're in a good fine arts program at a school that values it and puts some emphasis on it, what do we have in that? 20% of the student body, maybe? Um, I mean, every school is different, but what about the other 80%? I mean, they need to have a musical experience as well. And if they aren't into band, orchestra, or chorus, a lot of schools don't have anything to offer them. So I've opened my classroom up to hopefully appeal to a larger swath of the population that doesn't want to feel the pressure of getting ones at competitions and singing like a professional and just doing super high level classical music and everything being about reading. I want to make sure that students are welcome who want to make music in other ways. And as the years go by, hopefully the word kind of spreads that we don't just sing Mozart, that there's a lot more going on. And that's actually another one of the reasons I started teaching guitar class a couple of years ago. I probably could have done it. I've played guitar since I was 15, but the orchestra teachers always taught it because I wanted to have 4 chorus classes. And I was pretty reluctant to teach guitar because I kind of thought of it as a YouTube instrument. And I was like, oh, maybe it's not really worthy of study. I mean, I play guitar, but it's not. And I kind of kept rethinking it. And I thought, you know what? If I can get 30 students in my guitar class to be excited about their instrument, to be excited about music, and to be able to make it in the way they want to, I think they're going to connect with it for a lifetime. And that's going to improve their mental health, that's going to improve their physical health, and it's going to connect them to other people and make the world a better place. So if we can reach larger than 20% of the student population, we've got to. I think that's vitally important to our culture, to our future. And I still love choruses. It's my favorite thing. But we need to also include what's the students' favorite things, not just the kids who love chorus.
And it's funny, like, think of how often kids get to make decisions during the school day. Never, you know? And then we get mad at them for making poor decisions. Like, well, when do we ever guide them in making these decisions? And I say that as somebody who's kind of in the trenches, like, no, I know what it means to try to give them decision-making power, because many of them, you're going to get all kinds of different things, whether it be how to act or how to create a piece of music, And I don't know if I read this somewhere, or if I probably read it. I'm not that smart to think of this kind of stuff myself, but somebody I'm sure said, when during the school day do kids get to be creative and use their imagination and make decisions? It's out at recess. It's not in the classroom. As soon as they come into the classroom, we take away that opportunity to learn how to make decisions, aesthetic or otherwise. And it's just something kind of thought about, like, man, in my classroom, I'm who's making all the decisions? It's an interesting filter to go and observe a classroom through. Who's making the decisions here?
And it's so funny because I think so many people, they say, but music class, it's creative. Like, it can be if we allow them to be creative.
Yeah. There's a wonderful lecture kind of interview by I'm not sure how to say her first name, Maud Hickey.
Oh,
I might be butchering it. Where she talks about, if we structured an visual arts program like we do music oftentimes, and essentially like if all kids did was recreate exactly other art pieces, it's like, well, that's not very artistic. They should have a chance to kind of create their own. But it's like, but we don't really do that a whole lot in music. And so I've really tried to make space in my music classrooms to let students be creative, especially through composition. And her book, I don't know if I have it here. I do have it. It is Music Outside the Lines. Was just been groundbreaking for me. So if you're looking for ideas, start with this book. This has been a great book for starting that process.
And then in high school, students join ensemble and they get 2 classes for the price of 1. And this is a structure I've come upon. I'm facing a little pressure to consider breaking it up, and I'm resisting that pressure. So students in the high school join the full ensemble, and they also, as part of that group, are in a small ensemble. So there's like a pullout. If we have 3 rehearsals a week, once a week they're doing a small group. And the choices are chamber orchestra, because there are always kids that just want to play classical music or feel most comfortable doing that and love doing it. And our strings teacher takes that on. Some kids choose percussion ensemble, which is taught by the percussion teacher who has percussion ensembles in the middle school. And that tends to be either new composed or, again, arrangements of cover pop stuff or kind of abstract modern stuff that you would think of as more connected to like contemporary classical music. And then I coach the lab band, which we run like a rock band. And so that's for kids that just want to play rock music. And what's cool is that this year we had we had a violinist and a saxophone player join the percussion ensemble because they wanted to do that. We had a violinist decide to learn how to play drums in the rock band. A trumpet player, similar, decided to play drums in the rock band. Somebody decided to try singing, which, I'm not the choir teacher, and that was really cool. And I find that with this dual structure in the high school, the musicianship that's built is kind of like synergistic between all the groups. So as I face some pressure to launch the rock band as its own class and to launch the percussion ensemble as its own class and the chamber orchestra, I'm afraid of breaking this magic in a certain way, like diluting the musicianship, because I think everything that's going on in that percussion ensemble is feeding what we're doing in large ensemble. And everything that we're doing in large ensemble is feeding what's happening in the chamber ensemble. And I'm trying to really, in a patient way, keep explaining the value of the 2-for-1 class structure for our high school instrumental students. Because I do think it's something a little bit unique, and I see a lot of risk taking within the dual structure, which is something that I'm thrilled and is something I'm trying to cultivate in my students.
Yeah. What a great opportunity. And the fact that they're so diverse, those like pull out ensembles, that you're really getting kids a chance to try things. I mean, and are they, I don't want to say stuck with what they pick one year, or can they try something different the next year?
Oh, we let them change. Well, I've been pretty liberal about letting them change, kind of like, oh, you want to join us for a piece, but that's not like a sustainable rehearsal model. So we ask them to commit for a semester. And so they can try half year in percussion ensemble, half year in rock band, go back to chamber orchestra the next year if that feels comfortable. Maybe they finally get to senior year and say like, I always wanted to try the drums, and they, make a different choice. Yeah. So the emphasis is on trying different things.
And so I divided them up into 4 groups, and I had them create their own games. And I think that when I talk about student-centered learning through game creation, some people automatically think gamification, and it's not necessarily gamification. I think that when we talk about gamification, we talk about teachers making music or whatever subject area into a game-like instance, right? So the teacher's actually creating the game. But in this case, the students are creating the games. So they are actually the ones, I suppose, making the gamification. But so I set up some supports for them. I said each group is going to have one musical element that they need to focus on, that their game is going to be centered around. So one group will be centered around melody. And you can do whatever you want with melody, but the game needs to be centered around melody. And the player needs to be able to, at some point, will need to sing or play a melody, somehow show that they know what a melody is and that they can play it. And then the second group is rhythm, so kind of similar thing. And the third group was texture, and the fourth group was I'll remember in a moment, I'm sure. So they each got together, and I gave them 4 weeks. And over the 4 weeks, the first week I had them set up the rules. So what is the game going to be? What are the rules? And then you're going to give me a piece of paper at the end of the period that says the name of the game, the rules, what materials you need, and how you think you're going to play it, and how do people win, right? How do you get to the end, or how does the game end? And this is all based on this book that I came across during my time in my graduate schooling, which was by Jane McGonigal, and it's called Reality is Broken. The games, it was something about games, but the whole book was about games and the rules that make up games. So, I kind of went down the rabbit hole with that and became inspired. And so that was also part of the whole time, how it all came together, is that this idea came through the book. So I have her to thank. But then the second week, I had time to see what materials the students wanted. So I collected those materials for them, or I would ask them, okay, do you think you can find this material at home? Maybe it might be a spinner, and they wanted to create their own spinner, and they need a little tiny little, pin for that. And so there was one of them, one of the teams needed Velcro. I said, okay, do you think you can find Velcro, or do you want me to find Velcro, right? And so then the game building started in the second week. I gave them each whatever they needed. Some of them, actually most of them, wanted a poster board. So they immediately thought of a board game. And one group, the rhythm group, actually, instead of using a physical game board, they created one on, at the time on Google, there was an app it's just blank, and you can do whatever you want with it. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was just a blank white sheet of paper, basically, but online. And so they could create shapes and do all sorts of things. And I think now that might have been replaced by the Jamboard, because you can things like that. But they created their own game board on the computer, and they projected it on the smart board, which we had at the time. And then they also had, we were using Music First Junior, and they were creating rhythms on that through one of the apps on there. And so they would play the rhythm, and then the player had to guess what meter it was by what they had created. So they were composing these rhythms with this app, and then they were, having the students or the players, play this game. So it was really interesting. And these kind of ideas I would never have thought myself. So I really enjoyed learning from them and seeing what they came up with. And so this moment was a huge moment of creative thinking for them. And I think when we think about creativity in music, we often think of improvisation, we think of composition. But this is creative thinking that can include improvisation and composition, and which it did. But it was really the game creation itself, that was the creative act. And then within that, there were other creative acts.
Thanks for joining us. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.
We'd also love for you to consider sharing this podcast with a friend and leaving a positive review. That's one of the best ways to get this message to new listeners.